This week, Kentucky joins a long list of states to tell parents, affirm your child's desire to gender transition or else. Texas preschoolers slipped a sleeping aid without their parents' knowledge. And it's not accidents or ailments. Hear what's now become the fifth leading cause of death among Canadians. These stories and plenty more on deck this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now let's meet our panel, some of the folks behind the stories at readlion.com. Josh Mann, our managing editor, Michael Ryan, executive editor, and Adam Wittenberg is a staff writer, all here from The Lion. Gentlemen, welcome today as we jump into the lead story of the week, and that is Kentucky, a state that, Josh, many people politically would assume is a conservative one, but not necessarily governed by a conservative.
Yeah, Governor Beshear signed an executive order a little over a month ago, or a little less than a month ago, banning conversion therapy or any state funds for such therapy for minors in the state. Now, this is really significant because, first of all, this was an executive action. It wasn't something from the legislature. But it also includes any treatment or counseling that might suggest to a minor that they can change their gender identity or that doesn't affirm their chosen gender identity. And so essentially the governor is saying those with traditional Christian views are not welcome to receive any state funds. And so this raises huge questions about, for example, state funds in their foster care system or adoption. So we asked government officials over a 2-week period, numerous government officials about this. And really, we got passed around. Nobody's answering any of our questions. But we had a couple of law firms who did answer our questions, and they're really concerned about it. They say it's unconstitutional. And what is most concerning, really, are how Christian families or even Christian minors, perhaps in the foster care system, who maybe want counseling that affirms their faith and can't get it, essentially.
Yeah, this is a running theme we're seeing at the gubernatorial level. Adam, you and I were talking about this a little before the show. This is yet another governor, much like Newsom and others, who stepped in and said, I know better than you as a parent in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, this is utter hypocrisy. Aren't these the same people who, when it comes to abortion, are like, the relationship between a woman and her doctor is sacred. The state shouldn't interfere with that. But here's a governor, and I think there's 20 other states that have passed these similar rules saying if you're a doctor, a counselor, a foster parent, you cannot tell a child who wants to change their gender, don't do it, or we'll get you some help, or you shouldn't do it. All you can do is just go along with it and be like, yep, sure, you can change your gender, go have, a procedure or whatever you want, and you can get in legal trouble or lose state funding if you oppose that.
Michael, this reminds me of a debate not long ago in the country on gay marriage and really just homosexuality generally. If parents wanted to send their kids to any kind of institution or therapy or counseling to discuss their sexuality, I remember once upon a time that was outlawed and seen as cruel and unusual. Now we've upped the game to the issue of I don't think I'm the gender I was born. That's cruel if you want to discuss that with a therapist first.
Yeah, this is a much bigger story than most of the media seem to think. This executive order in Kentucky and other rules like it around the country patently violate the First Amendment's free speech and religious rights. For government to govern what we think and say, that's just incredible. It's frightening. I'm not sure religious freedom has ever been more under attack in this country than it is today. And, something like this lays the groundwork for actually taking kids from parents who won't affirm their gender confusion or gender identity. And that's not an idle threat. The Daily Caller News Foundation had this headline recently: Biden-Harris administration paves way for bureaucrats to take gender-confused kids from non-affirming parents. It makes government the parent. This is totalitarian stuff. What are we going to do next? Are we going to say, well, you can't counsel against abortion? Are we going to tell counselors that they have to use Freud and not Jung? This is ridiculous questions. But the number one question, I think, should be, what if the parents are right? What if the kids are wrong?
And that's a great point, the word affirming unto itself, codified into law, that adults must affirm what a child feels. I don't know about you gentlemen, but being raised by a dad who didn't really care much about what I thought or how I felt on any given topic generally, if he said it, that was that. There wasn't much discussion. Certainly no discussion of affirming. But anyway, there is another movie out this week. We discussed Reagan a couple of weeks ago, gentlemen, that had done very well despite very little attention. There's another one out, and we have talked about the case of Coach Joe Kennedy before. They've now made a film about him, and Michael, you and I communicated a little bit about this. You hope everybody sees it because you think it's that good and worthwhile before it ends up vanishing from theaters.
Yeah, and I think you need to go see it just for the historical impact of it, but you might as well see it because it's just a darn good flick. I was very impressed with it. It's about the most consequential religious freedom case in memory. Coach Joe Kennedy was fired from a high school coaching position in Washington State for having knelt and prayed silently in his head. Think about that. I mean, that sounds like North Korea to many of us. But this movie about that case, it's just fun. It's an amazing work of art here. It's well acted, it's well directed, it's well written, and honestly, it shows the toll that this kind of tyranny really takes on real people like the Kennedys. But Average Joe, the movie, if you don't go out and see it, it's going to disappear from theaters real quickly. And I tell you, it sets a new standard for faith-based film.
That case, Josh, when that was decided by the Supreme Court, it kind of took a back seat because there were more high-profile cases being decided at the time. But to those of us in the free speech business, as I know you are, there couldn't be a more important case.
Yeah, and it relates to the story we just discussed. I mean, the First Amendment is such an important protection for American citizens that anytime it's threatened, we need to be paying attention, close attention, because if we lose the right to, or if the government fails to respect our right to believe what we want, to say what we think, then we're in real trouble. And so, thankfully, I haven't seen the movie, but I'm very familiar with the case, and thankfully the Supreme Court ruled in Coach Kennedy's favor. And so, we continue to see cases like these, though, litigated, and so we need to pay close attention to them.
Adam, turning to a story out of Kansas City and a drag show. We do cover quite a few drag shows that end up making news around here, which is always sort of interesting. What do you know? Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting case where a social services agency in Kansas City called Synergy Services, which annually gets about $2 to $3 million of taxpayer money, was hosting an annual, it was called the Queers and Fears, an LGBTQ plus youth and allies Halloween party. And suddenly they abruptly canceled this party, and they claimed it was safety threats about this event. Now, they've been having the event for a few years, but what's probably really happening is that this agency is currently campaigning for a ballot measure to raise, to tax people more, to create a special fund that would go to their agency and other social services agencies. And so because they're actively campaigning for this money, they're getting bad PR because they're doing this drag show for this community and whatnot. So they abruptly canceled it, and our reporter did a good job exposing that there probably isn't any tangible threat. It's probably all political.
I'm asking this rhetorically. Maybe there's no answer to it. Why, Michael, are drag shows always the fundraising driver these days? We've covered other stories where this has been the case, and they've ended up calling attention to themselves negatively.
Well, I don't know, but parents, if you want a real scare for Halloween, just read The Lion. I mean, stories like this are just really horrifying. Just imagine if this event, this planned event, which had been going on in years prior, as Adam says, had featured real women and perhaps strippers, and all the way down to seventh grade. All the way down to seventh grade. How impressionable were you at that age? Instead of men, acting lewdly in women's outfits, I mean, how is that any better than actual strippers, female strippers going out there? Some say it would be worse because it's obvious conditioning for alternative sexual lifestyles.
I mean, Josh, this has been used in Christmas pageants and fundraisers. This has been used at child's libraries and reading times. Now this Synergy services. I guess I struggle to see the correlation between these events and drag shows.
Yeah, I think for them, they think that they're being inclusive. They think that this is something that's compassionate towards the youth that they're serving. But this drag show is for ages 12 to 20. I mean, think about that age range for just a minute. And when you're talking about sensual performances, and you've got a potentially 12-year-old with an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, we know what happens on college campuses. These are adults. They're free to make their own choices. That's really different than inviting troubled youth of tween years or early teens to an event that is sensual. And so, I think it should be concerning. The other thing that's really concerning about this is that this organization has been appropriated some $11 million since 2020 for their services. And in fact, there was some opposition to this ballot measure in Platte County from a commissioner who was worried that at some point this money could be used or approved to be used for things that such as drag shows and other kinds of things. And so I'm not sure that commissioner even knew they had this on the calendar. And so it's really concerning on a number of levels.
These stories, many like it, we continue to cover at readlion.com. I hope you'll check them all out. Michael's not wrong. Another story this week that is horrifying if you're a parent, particularly a parent of a toddler, a preschooler. You drop your preschooler off to be cared for during the day, Josh Mann, and the next thing you hear, they're being given sleep aids to take naps.
Yeah, and so one mother discovered their child came home and talked about sleepy stickers, and it was under the child's shorts. And so the mother looked up what the sticker was, and it was a sleep aid for adults with melatonin and other herbs and things that are supposed to help you sleep. And available on Amazon. And so this mother was horrified, and rightly so, because the parents were not notified that these would be used. Their permission was not sought. Now, the elementary school, apparently, where these preschoolers were attending, did place 4 staff members on administrative leave, and so there is action being taken. But how this could happen in the first place is mind-boggling. And as a parent, to think that your child would come home having been essentially drugged to sleep is really disconcerting.
Michael, we were joking a little about it. I mean, look, when we were kids, maybe you could make the call on how to help get your kid to sleep, but you certainly don't want a stranger or someone you're entrusting with their care to call an audible about how they might get them to sleep.
Absolutely. Who gave these people the right to drug other people's children? Caring for your own children is the most important thing you'll ever do. Caring for other people's children is a special kind of solemn obligation. And so there's so many cases around the country these days in which school authorities and other adults feel empowered to do things with or to kids that their parents don't know about and don't consent to. It's just amazing. The gall also of this particular Texas school district to tell the parents involved in this case not to spread it around, to keep it quiet. I mean, that's just incredible. If this behavior and the cover-up isn't criminal, it should be.
Adam, this may well explain, this and stories like these we've talked about today and cover here, may explain why the explosive growth in homeschooling. I mean, I wonder if parents are beginning to think to themselves, I really can't entrust my children out of my own custody. I'm better suited to do it myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have an upcoming op-ed piece that I wrote about the rise of micro schools, homeschool co-ops, and parents kind of taking back that power. And I think one of the symptoms we see in this story is education has become mechanized. Education has become like a factory. And so if the end goal is just to, pass a test, get a grade, get the kid to be quiet, anything goes. But in a micro school, a homeschool, it's relational, it's cooperative, it's families and people helping people. And so you wouldn't do that to someone else's child, or at least not without their permission.
Another really fascinating story at readline.com this week. It's a social issue story of sorts. And, often we get caught up in a debate about abortion in the country, and we ought to. But we don't often talk about the other side of this, and that is assisted suicide, oftentimes with people that are either ailing or elderly. And Michael, a lot of people are flip about this subject. Well, if I'm old and I'm sick, I'd like to be able to take myself out or what have you. I've heard that said 1,000 times. But this is becoming hugely popular in Canada specifically.
Yeah, and it's a frightening slippery slope. If this were any other cause of death that were bumping up the charts, as it were, there would be alarms sounding, and they would do everything they can to fight this. The fact of the matter is, they've studied this, and apparently from euthanasia request to completion, there's an average of 11 days. I can't even decide whether to buy a car in 11 days. Can you imagine that kind of swift end to your life? I absolutely understand despair and disease, but I'm also a student of Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, who found and taught in later life that meaning can be found in any life, any circumstances, up until your last breath. I would think surely our Creator would agree with that.
Yeah, Josh, I was going to ask you that. Theologically speaking, kind of a heavy topic, maybe not your wheelhouse, but I'd ask, theologically, for people who are believers, where does assisted suicide land, in your view?
Yeah, in my view, it's God's court. I mean, it's his decision. And so I think that when we talk about dignity of life as Christians or biblical views of life, it's not just life at conception, but to the grave, to the end. And so I agree with Frankl's view that all life has dignity. Even an ill, sick bodied person has dignity, and that those breaths are important, even if they're painful. And so there's a lot in the Bible actually about how to walk through pain and the purpose of pain and how to cope with pain and what God's plan in pain might be. So again, where I'm with Michael and really compassionate and understanding that sometimes those last days or years are painful or difficult. The other concerning thing in Canada, so this has become the 5th leading cause of death, is this assisted suicide, but it's also approved at an alarming rate. I mean, patients are almost never told no, and then the short time when that decision is made to when the end comes is also staggering. And so maybe there's something else going on that we need to look at. What's causing the despair? Is it simply illness? Because humans have been dealing with illnesses for a very long time, and we're living in some of the best times, humanly speaking, as we ever have.
It seems, Adam, the running theme to me, my words, not yours, is whether you talk about late-stage abortion or whether you talk about gender transitioning or you talk about assisted suicide, the thing they all seem to have in common, in my opinion, people pretending they're God.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. It's been said the 2 most attacked books in the Bible are Genesis and Revelation. And so we see in Genesis right at the start, in his image he created them, male and female he created them. Attack on the 2 genders. Or the first command in the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. There's a war on multiplication and family. I would argue this Canada thing is part of that depopulation agenda that many extreme leftists openly talk about. And then fill the earth and subdue it. There's elevating animals up above humans, or we have to bow down to an extreme environmental agenda that is actually dehumanizing people. So I think you're spot on, Chris, that this is trying to dethrone God and enthrone humans, but also rebel against his commands and his design for humanity.
Fantastic stuff, and sometimes deep stuff, just like this at readline.com. Before we close, we always like to ask the panel their favorite stories of the week. And Michael, we start with you, a particular story you'd call our attention to this week at readline.com.
Well, I think my favorite is the story out of Kentucky about the executive order banning conversion therapy. It's just, aside from the constitutional and the moral concerns about this, I have to wonder, how do we keep making law through executive order? That sounds like dictatorship to me.
Adam, your favorite this week?
Yeah, it was actually written by Michael. It's Professor abruptly leaves KU, or the University of Kansas, after telling class that men who don't vote for Kamala Harris could be lined up and shot.
Yeah, did we talk about that one last week or not? I can't remember if we got that into the show or not, because that ended up being a big explosive story, Michael, which, sorry to deviate for a moment, but that ended up many people that heard that, and I know we reported here, that professor has since left the campus, as I understand it. Is that right?
Yes, and there's some question as to how that leaving was orchestrated, but yeah, he apparently has left the employ of KU.
Yeah, continue to stay at readline.com and we'll cover it. Josh, your favorite story of the week?
We have one about to publish on a Christian school near Asheville, North Carolina, which was devastated after the Helene rains fell down on it and just really wreaked havoc. I mean, they had mobile homes and cars on their sports fields, and just how they're coping, how they're rebuilding. They have plans to have the school open and ready to go in January, and so it's a really impressive story about grit, determination, and God's grace.
Great stuff. Panel, thank you. That will do it for us this week. Be sure to keep up to date on all the latest news every day at readlion.com. For all of us at The Lion, until next time, thanks for downloading the show.